Hello, everybody. Welcome to another CERAWeek conversation. This conversation will be about carbon capture use and sequestration. I have a great panel for this conversation. I have Cindy Yielding, who is the Senior Vice President at BP, and she was also the chair of the coordinating subcommittee for the National Petroleum Council study on the CCUS. I have Scott Willis, who is the Vice President for Commercial Development at Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. And then from Norway, we are very fortunate to have John Christopher Knudsen, who is the Vice President for Global Business Development at the Aker Solutions. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and welcome to CERAWeek Conversation. So let me just outline for our audience the panel's objectives, and then we will get into the discussion. So CCUS is now a pretty hot topic after some hiatus. So we're going to talk about how CCUS, we think, is going to play a role in meeting the longer term emission targets, particularly a role in reducing emissions in some of the industrial targets, like decarbonizing industries like cement, steel, fertilizers, and also in producing hydrogen. We will talk about the current state of the technology, and then what can we learn from the projects that are currently underway. So we'll start with the big picture and then get into the specifics. Cindy, I'll start with you. Why is CCUS important in meeting future emission targets?
So, hi, Atul. Thanks so much for including me on this panel, and much appreciation for the question. So, while carbon capture, use, and storage is not the only solution to addressing the world's carbon challenges, CCUS can play a critical part in the all-of-the-above solution to reducing CO2. So basically, CCUS should be considered as an element of any decarbonization strategy. So this may seem kind of counterintuitive, but CCUS is the most cost-effective carbon reduction technology available today. So in the fifth assessment report, the IPCC concluded that the cost for achieving atmospheric CO2 levels consistent with a 2°C world would be twice as expensive if we didn't have CCUS. So another point, CCUS is proven technology. We can capture, transport, and store CO2 today and have been doing so for decades. We don't have to wait for a solution. We have this capability now. So, and then just finally, CCUS technologies under research and development today offer the best potential scenarios to a negative emissions scenario, which may be required to reduce excess carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cindy. So it's a good segue to you, Scott. Why do you think the oil and gas industry can play a role in the scaling up of CCUS?
Well, there's really three main factors, Atul. And we see oil and gas companies are experts in understanding and managing reservoirs of oil and gas reservoirs around the world. And this expertise is critical in managing CO2 as it's sequestered or used underground. So the expertise that's been developed over 100 years of working in oil and gas fields will go forward to manage effectively carbon in the future in managing carbon management underground. The other piece is oil and gas companies are uniquely skilled in managing major projects. And as Cindy said, a lot of these CCUS are very large projects, and this project management techniques have been developed again over many decades with major oil and gas companies, and those skills will be used to execute these projects.
So clearly, oil and gas industry has a role and has been actually doing quite a lot of carbon capture. We will come back to that in a minute. But John Christopher, what about, I remember back in the early 2000s, everybody was talking about carbon capture, and then it kind of disappeared. It seems to have reappeared now in the last few years. What's changed?
Well, I think you're right, Atul. If you look into history, we started off already in 1996 with the delivery of the Sleipner platform, which is an offshore capture platform capturing more than 1 million tons of CO2 ever since. So the history goes long back, and it's been a roller coaster ride for Aker's capabilities as well as the CCUS industry, I would say. And in the, I would say in the early 2000s, there was a lot of interest and a lot of investments ongoing pretty similar to what we saw right now. But what happened was that I think the air got out of this in the midst of this, as people were waking up to see that every company I talk to, they need to go through a journey. They need to go to look and see energy efficiency. What can we do? Can we do renewables? And there are, certain steps that you need to go through before you actually get to the moment where you say, well, actually carbon capture might be actually the solution I've been looking for if I'm a hard to abate emitter. And I think that was kind of the immaturity what we saw in the market, which led to some of the backlashes both in the UK. We were one of the first to capture CO2 in the UK, and then suddenly all of these projects stop, and we saw the similar thing coming into Norway. So after we delivered the technology center Mongstad, things became very quiet, but we kept on developing the technology. And of course, today, when we see the market coming back, people realizing this is part of the solution, then of course, we're very, very glad that we continued investing in this, and that we can do, like Cindy just pointed out, these are proven solutions, and these are the most important solution for the next decade and the decade to come.
So technology is there, it's proven. As Scott, you said, the oil and gas industry has a history in it. So many good reasons. So let's get into some more details. So Cindy, you were the chair of the subcommittee chair for NPC study, which was endorsed back in December. So tell us what has happened. What's the progress report on the study since then?
Yeah, so Atul, as the lead author on the value chain subgroup, you know as well as anyone how much expertise, collaboration, and consensus goes into an NPC study. So I just wanted to say thanks again for your leadership in this effort. So I much appreciate it. So as context for those of you on the call, the U.S. National Petroleum Council is a federal advisory committee that exists solely to answer questions from the U.S. Department of Energy. So in 2017, Secretary Rick Perry asked the council to undertake a study to define potential pathways for developing carbon capture, use, and storage at scale in the US. So we assembled a team of over 300 experts from academia, NGOs, government, and a range of industries. And we spent almost 2 years researching, discussing, and framing aligned responses to these questions. So we've documented our findings in a report entitled Meeting the Dual Challenge, a roadmap to at-scale deployment of carbon capture, use, and storage. So since that draft study report was endorsed by the NPC in December 2019, we've been focused on finalizing the report. Volume 1, which is the executive summary, was published in the first quarter of this year, and volumes 2 and 3, which are analysis of CCUS deployment at scale, and a volume on CCUS technologies are all available today on the NPC website. In addition, the study contributors have been sharing our findings and recommendations with key stakeholders in the US and internationally. So the clear consensus-driven recommendations of the report are currently helping to shape the business case for CCUS, as well as the policy and the technology investments that will help us to progress to at-scale deployment.
Okay, thank you. Scott, you're part of, as I said in my introduction, you're part of the Oxy's Low Carbon Ventures group. Could you say a little bit about what is the remit of that group?
So before we get started, just a couple things about Oxy. First, we're one of the largest independent oil and gas companies in the world. Second, our CEO, Vicki Holla, was one of the first corporate leaders to talk about aspirations of being carbon neutral. And that's really what's driven Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. But third, and probably as important, is we're one of the largest and most experienced users of CO2 in the world. So we have over 40 years of experience safely and successfully handling CO2, really through carbon capture, large-scale CO2 transportation and storage. And that's all been part of our enhanced oil recovery operations. And this experience has really helped us create a vision to have lower carbon products, and for both us and other companies to help reduce the carbon impact of that. So in our operations today, we store approximately 20 million tons of CO2 per year. And we're also expanding this capability to capture more human-made carbon dioxide. So in 2018, Oxy formed a new business unit, Oxy Low Carbon Ventures, or OLCV, to substantially enhance our business. And our focus is on developing carbon capture, utilization, and storage opportunities from both industrial sources and the atmosphere, so that we can permanently store the CO2 deep underground, either in EOR operations or in saline aquifers, so that we have less carbon intensive products such as fuels, chemicals, concretes, and others. So a couple of examples I'd like to give are, one is an industrial source capture project, which we announced with White Energy, and it's going to utilize the 45Q tax credits as well as California's low carbon fuel standard to accelerate carbon capture infrastructure. This project will capture CO2 from White Energy's 2 ethanol plants in the Texas Panhandle. And this captured CO2 will be dehydrated, purified, and compressed, and then transported to Oxy's West Seminole enhanced oil recovery field for injection and sequestration. This project was also the first announced CCUS project under the Future Act. So the second example I want to talk about is removal of CO2 from the atmosphere through direct air capture. And our investment and partnership with Carbon Engineering has allowed us to begin the development of the first large-scale commercial direct air capture facility in the world. And it will be designed to remove just about 1 million tons of CO2 per year directly from the atmosphere in the Permian Basin. This captured CO2 will be used in lower carbon oil production, resulting in what we're calling a carbon neutral energy cycle. And this carbon neutral energy cycle will allow us to permanently sequester an amount of atmospheric CO2 equal to or greater than the emissions which are created through the production, processing, and combustion of the oil produced. Another advantage we see to direct air capture is there is no feedstock risk. So with any industrial emitter, you have some feedstock risk of their business. In this case, direct air capture is a little more similar to wind and solar in that you've got CO2 in the atmosphere, which you're pulling from. So we see the utilization of direct air capture to a carbon neutral energy cycle as being able to continue to utilize the world's infrastructure for transportation.
So Scott, I want to cover quite a bit of ground. So I'll come back to some of those specific
Okay.
things. Let me go to John Christopher. So same question, John Christopher, Aker Solutions. Can you say a little bit about what you do and your involvement with carbon capture?
Absolutely. So the Aker carbon capture history, as I said, dated back already to 1996. And then we realized that there were quite a few people that could offer what we call the pre-combustion technology, such as gas sweetening. So we started focusing in on post-combustion endopipe solutions. And this is really the core of the Aker carbon capture offering today, which is to apply post-combustion capture to flue gases from industrial sources that is hard to abate. Typically, not only cement, but waste energy. We see a lot of interest from steel and quite a few also on the biomass side, trying to position now for a possible low or negative emission type of schemes, which are coming into Europe and the discussion around that. And then we realized very quickly that when we were contracted to build this technology center Mongstad and design this large-scale test plant for amine testing, we understood very quickly that the HSE profile of our technology needed to be improved. So different from any other of the post-combustion competitors, our focus has been primarily on HSE and how could you actually get to a carbon capture which is HSE friendly, which has very low emissions, and where you select those amines that do not form anything hazardous. So there was a lot of focus on that when we realized the project at the Technology Center Mongstad in 2012. well. And that has really been one of the strongholds going forward, because we believe when you go into medium and large scale plants, you really start focusing on what is it actually that comes out of these carbon capture plants. How efficient are they? And how can you maintain a HSE friendly profile on these plants? So that's been the focus of our technology development, so not only these mid-range products, the 40,000 and 100,000 tons compact ones, but also on the large scale, because that's really when things start matter to the governments of the different countries that we're operating in.
So I'll come back to some of the new large scale projects you're involved in a little bit. But Cindy, I want to go back to you and ask you about 45Q, which Scott referred to. So you could start by just explaining what it is, but also, in February, IRS issued some guidance on this tax code, and then there was rulemaking just last month in June. So is that sufficient to break the hiatus? I mean, what else is needed on this front?
But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, 45Q is the section of the US tax code that provides operators with a tax credit of $35 a ton of CO2 captured and stored via enhanced oil recovery or used, and a $50 per ton tax credit for CO2 stored via geologic storage. So we're really grateful for the recent clarity provided by the IRS on 45Q. And in addition, we're really pleased that the IRS has issued the notice of proposed rulemaking just recently in June. Overall, Atul, we think it's very comprehensive and it's going in the right direction to enable CCUS projects to move forward in the US. What else is needed? One thing that we would like to see is a legislative extension of the begin construction deadline, which is currently set for January 1st, 2024. CCUS projects have long lead times, and we're already running up against that deadline. So that's one thing that we believe would enhance the opportunities.
So right now, only projects which are which start by January 1, 2024 are eligible. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have a view on how long the extension should be? Should that be indefinite or not?
Well, in the NPC study, we said 6 years. I think, there are a range of different recommendations. Indefinitely would be really great for business planning and probably stimulate a lot of creative thoughts and new technologies. But 5 or 6 years would be a great start.
Okay, thank you. So Scott, you mentioned about operations Oxy has in the Permian. Just for our audience who may not be familiar with the EOR operations you have, could you briefly just describe the scale, how much CO2 you inject, oil you recover? Just give us an idea of the scale you have there.
Yeah, so for our EOR business, and it's really focused in the Permian Basin. EOR is a tertiary recovery, so it's after primary production and typically water flooding. So as oil is left in place, CO2 is injected into the reservoir into a almost liquid state, a supercritical state. And then this CO2 is miscible with the oil, so it effectively combines with the oil. And from there, it changes the viscosity of the oil and allows the oil to be moved mobile to be produced. So again, as I said, we sequester or we store about 20 million metric tons a year. We actually probably handle about 50 million metric tons a year in our CO2 handling system. Our EOR production, based on last year's on our earnings reports, is about 155,000 BOEs. So it's a very large scale operation. We have 34 CO2 floods in the Permian Basin, which we're operating now, and then several other potentials that are underwater flooding, which we continue to evaluate for EOR. A lot of the information we have as well is on our website. So we've launched a new website last week for low carbon ventures, and it's Oxy, OXY, lowcarbon.com. So a lot of the information on the projects themselves, the technologies we're looking at, as well as our CO2 operations are all found there. So I'd encourage anybody to go there. There's quite a bit of information there for people to refer to.
Okay, thank you. Just good timing, so people should definitely look at it. So,
Yeah.
so John Christopher, I want to delve a bit deeper into the technologies. You kind of alluded to them a little bit. You have different technologies. So could you talk about this range of technologies and their applications?
Absolutely. So our history, of course, started with the acknowledgement that if you're going to be a serious flue gas-based capture provider, you need to do a lot of testing. So already in 2008, we built this mobile test unit that you might be seeing a lot of, or on many of the shots that we have around the world in terms of we've been to Alabama, we've been to the CCC, we've been to Scottish Power in Scotland and around the world. And the importance of this is still being very much felt because there are two things that people would like to see. They would like to see proven technology, but they also would like to see risk reduction in their large scale plants. So for instance, now that we have been working with Heidelberg Cement Norcem in Brevik on the cement factory in Brevik in Norway now since 2011, and we're now approaching the EPC phase of that. And then of course this full year of testing on their flue gas provides a lot of extra value for Heidelberg Cement because they know that the technology, not only the solvent, but the complete plant will actually work according to the specifications. So that's kind of the basis. So we've tested on coal, we've tested on gas, we've tested on cracker gases, which was very difficult, I could tell you. And we've tested on cement and waste to energy. So we have a wide range of flue gases, and we continue to kind of develop that qualifications together with DNVGL so that we qualify this for the individual flue gases. Now, having said that, the core technology then needs to be packaged in various ways. So when we look at, for instance, a waste incinerator or a medium-sized emitter, they need something compact. They need something that is quickly to manufacture, that we can deliver, in 12 to 15 months, that really needs very little from the site itself, and we can prefabricate and bring to site. So that's where we have this Just Catch series. And then we have those, the Heidelberg Cements, the big ones, 400,000, a million, 2 millions. And this is where, the integrated plants where to come in, and where we really need to integrate towards the processes in order to both utilize the available heat and cooling at the site, as well as getting an optimal plant. This recent announcement around the qualifications for cement done by DNVGL, where we didn't have to add any energy in order to capture 400,000 tons. That has a lot of interest from the market.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up on this. In Europe, how feasible is carbon capture going to be given sort of the constraints of where you can store CO2? Is it going to be mainly an offshore activity?
Yeah, no, I think what we're looking at is different from country to country. So, of course, Norway has been positioning this offshore because we recognize the fact that we need something after the oil, and we also have the available funding from the state in order to progress the CCUS industry in Norway. But of course, the Norwegian demonstration project, which is now very close to FID, is just one out of many storage projects that are coming to the market. So we're seeing similar activities in Denmark, in Italy, so quite a few things going on in UK as well as on the continent. So I think the infrastructure for storing is certainly coming to the market, and now that means that the options for countries like, for instance, Germany, who's been very skeptical in terms of storing CO2 on land, they are suddenly opening up because now they can see the options of actually exporting this through shipping to some sort of an offshore storage location, and that opens a lot of different discussions again. So I think I would say that it's very country focused. Some countries very positive towards storage, other countries very focused on getting the CO2 either to permanent storage outside their country or focusing like Germany on power to X and usage of CO2. So it's quite an exciting, I would say it's the last year since we announced some of these deals with the modular one. It's been an amazing journey, and at Aker Carbon Capture we have certainly had no time to spare in terms of trying to manage all the interested customers.
It's good to hear.
Yeah.
Good to hear that there's progress. Yeah. So let me talk to both Scott and Cindy about some work within OGCI. Both of your companies are members of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. So Cindy, I'll start with you as a member of OGCI. I think you are participating in this Teesside industrial complex in the UK. Could you say a little bit about that project and kind of the vision for OGCI on CCUS front?
Yeah, so first of all, CCUS is a huge priority for the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative Partnership. So looking for ways to actually move forward and put CCUS in action. So on BP is the lead technical partner on net zero Teesside, which could become the UK's first commercial full value CCUS project. And as you said, we've invested in the project as a member of the OGCI. So Teesside's an integrated CCUS project consisting of a new combined cycle gas turbine with state-of-the-art carbon capture technology, which would provide low power carbon to back up renewable energy. So CO2 from this plant, as well as from a cluster of local heavy industries, would be captured through a common pipeline network and transported to a secure geologic storage offshore in the North Sea, like John Christopher was talking about, either in a saline aquifer or in a depleted oil and gas field. So there's a lot of potential. You're not really storage limited in the North Sea. So we think that's a really great opportunity. So the project is currently in what is referred to as stage 2 consultation since last fall. And what that means is they're focused on identifying the technical parameters, decisions on design and routes, and also in the environmental impact assessment. So Teesside in the UK, the industries account for almost 6% of the industrial emissions, and Teesside region is home to 5 of the top 25 carbon dioxide emitters in the UK. So CCUS here could make a real difference, and it could be very important. Just kind of finally on Teesside, it's a great bonus to the environment, but it also has some really great potential economic impacts as well. And just a couple of numbers, we could see an annual gross benefit of about $550 million per year once the project, if it gets up and running, and it could support over 5,000 direct jobs by 2035. So if we're able to move forward, great for reducing CO2, but also for the economic impact and benefits to the area in the UK.
Yeah. So Scott, similar question to you. Oxy is a member of OGCI. I'm just interested, why you joined and the value you're both getting and contributing, particularly on the carbon capture front, given all the expertise you have.
One of the benefits we really see with OGCI is on a project standpoint, a lot of the projects and technologies where you've got newer technologies, the struggle is getting funding to do a lot of the front-end engineering. So front-end engineering, are tens of millions of dollars, not project size. So project financing can work through once you've got an engineering design, but a lot of the companies struggle with the fact of getting projects detailed design and the money to do that. OGCI has really been looking at a lot of these companies, a lot of the technologies, a lot of these projects, and they're really using their funds to help move these along and act as a springboard to get the engineering done so that financial decisions can be made. So we see it as a great benefit to a consortium going through and helping facilitate very good carbon capture projects that need in the tens of millions of dollars to move them along to begin to get financial approval so that they can move forward on things like project financing, equity financing, and as Cindy talked about, to be able to use things like a 45Q tax credit. So we really see the work of OGCI very beneficial in being able to help move these projects along.
Great. Yeah. So we look forward to seeing, how OGCI develops. So John Christopher, I want to talk to you about sort of the large projects you're involved in. You You mentioned the North Sim and also now the Northern Lights. Could you talk briefly about these, how optimistic you are? And it's kind of interesting that the Norwegian government is now involved in some of the, particularly Northern Lights. So tell us about the scope and scale and the likelihood.
Yeah, Norcem is, as I said, a long history. It's a very focused case starting already in 2011. I think we need to realize that the Norwegian state has put a lot of emphasis on CCUS for the last 10, 15 years, offering support to those that would like to move forward in the early phases. And it's been very critical in order to actually realize these plans. The fun thing about Norcem is, of course, now that it's part of the Norwegian demonstration project, which is just around FID. So hopefully the state will then FID the whole project, the demonstration project in October. And it really comprises of two large-scale projects. It's Heidelberg Cement Norcem Brevik, which is the cement plant, which is going to be a first of a kind for cement. A first of a kind because it's of its design with no additional heat added. And then the Fortum Oslo Varme, which is a large-scale waste incinerator that also has about 400,000 tons captured per year. And both of those are going to go into what they are referred to as the Northern Lights project with its partners Equinor, Shell, and Total. And I think coming back to Scott's point, I think this is a very good example. We're seeing how the oil and gas industry is positioning towards helping along the infrastructure needed in order to realize CCUS at scale. So they will not only be storing this safely in an aquifer outside the west coast of Norway, but they will also be helping the first phase of the shipping. So they will be establishing the ship transportation that will be going to these first two sites. Now, the idea for the Norwegian state is, of course, that they would like to have more CO2 coming to Norway. So there is a range of MOUs that have been signed now with international companies that would like to deliver CO2 in the future to Northern Lights. So the first phase is going to be 1.2 million tons of capture or CO2 that could be delivered and stored in the project. But they've already thought about a bigger scale. So they have the pipeline already sized to a 5 million ton storage facility. So there is plenty of room for more people coming with their CO2 to deliver it to the Northern Lights. And I think what you will be seeing and what we see from the oil companies around the Northern Europe is that they're positioning from various angles. So we see Equinor, for instance, very active towards the UK market, and Shell and Total, of course, active in several of these other projects that are ongoing. So over time, I think we will see quite a range of different storage options and transportation options, which is important infrastructure in order to actually get started with the capture side, which we focus on then.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the hub concept, bring things together and
absolutely, yeah.
So
and I think I think the last, which I think is the most maybe exciting project at the moment, is of course for blue hydrogen, and we might come back to it. That I think this we're working now with Preem in Sweden, a refinery in Sweden, together with Equinor and the Swedish and Norwegian state, and testing capture on SMR technology, as well as we're developing also our own ATR technology. So this blue hydrogen concept and the role of hydrogen in the next generation type of energy system, I think that should not be underestimated, and it's something that we see not only in the UK, which is very active on this, but also in the Nordics and around Northern Europe.
Yeah, we had a CERAWeek conversation about hydrogen a few weeks back, and I'm sure we'll talk about hydrogen for a long time to come. As you say, very exciting, different shades of hydrogen, including blue hydrogen. So just my final round of question. I want to start with you, Scott. Given you talked about the Oxy low carbon venture, pretty wide spectrum of activities, including EOR, direct air capture. How critical you think a value on carbon, some price tax, how critical is that going to be in your thinking going forward?
So I won't comment on a tax credit, but we do think a value for carbon is critical going forward. And some of this goes to an understanding of as you work through these projects as well as you work through financing of them. So it's understanding the income streams of these projects. And Cindy talked about, a lot of these projects, she's talked about extending the 45Q start date. And some of that's because of the length of time it takes to execute these projects. These are not 12-month solar projects. These are, a quick one is 18 months and they can run, 3 to 3.5 years for some of these large scale projects. And with that, having a very good understanding of the revenue coming in on these is critical for financing. So we've seen things like the California low carbon fuel standard, which is very specific, but it's a market driven value on CO2, and that's helping to drive projects. I think our view of it as well is having a good base for some CO2 pricing. So a range for CO2 pricing will help give comfort to the market to begin financing these projects, as well as being able to, I think, develop projects more fully. So we do think the market, and it may be through some government mechanism, but it also can be business to business. So we see that as another critical piece, is a way to have a business to business transactions where we see several businesses very focused on carbon neutrality. So it's beginning to develop a clear, transparent method for the carbon capture. So ensuring that the carbon is indeed captured and sequestered properly, and then the financial transactions to move those credits through the system. So we're also working quite hard in trying to, with companies, to try and develop a very transparent view of the carbon being captured and then the financial transactions with that. So it could be a private transactions or something for the government management. But we do think that the pricing mechanisms are very critical.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, very, very good, very clear. Now, on the other hand, John Christopher, in Norway, you've had a carbon price and a tax for a long time. So how do you think that has influenced what you're seeing now on the carbon capture front?
Well, I think what we've seen is that it needs to be applied in more consistent ways. So I know that the Norwegian state is now reviewing this, because it's been parts of the sectors that have been not covered and parts of the sectors that have been covered. So it's been a little bit of a patchy. Well, I guess I see it in two folds. I see that, for instance, the oil and gas industry, of course, is very focused on this tax as it has been applied to some of the oil and gas activities. Overall, I would say the push towards carbon capture doesn't only come from the fear of, a rising carbon capture at a tax or a value. I think the push also comes from the fact that investors would like to see companies become greener and have a more sustainable business or value proposition. So, it's fun to be out there, because many times when we talk to, for instance, investors, it's all about, how green is this? Does this really, is this a next step so that we can move forward with some of these industries which are threatened, that their current business models are threatened? So I think it's a combination. Of course, it has a factor, and for instance, for Heidelberg Cement Brevik, of course, that plays a role. But I think also the quite significant focus that it's not only on the national level, but also down to the city level. Cities like Copenhagen, Oslo, and big cities around the world, they are setting very aggressive targets for their local, regions. And I think all of these in totality is what really moves the market at the moment, and not just the for instance, the ETS price, which many people tend to refer to.
Yeah, so thank you. So Cindy, last question to you, and I'm sure you're aware of this criticism of carbon capture, that it was just a way to prolong the oil and gas age. Of course, we know that we will need oil and gas for a long time to come, but how would you respond to those critics?
Yeah, so Atul, the way we talk about it is we kind of break it down. The world needs more energy due to increases in population and economic growth across the developing world. I mean, today we've got about 1 billion people with no access to reliable energy, and we want to help change their lifestyles. So renewable energy alone is unable to meet the increase in demand, while we also focus on delivering the emissions reductions consistent with the Paris goals. So that's what we call the dual challenge. And it's also going to take time to re-engineer the whole energy system. So hence organizations like IPCC, IEA, they've all said, as you noted, that fossil fuels will be a part of the energy mix for the foreseeable future. So we feel like it's important to get after the emissions that are being generated while we continue to move forward in the world. And another couple of notes, CCUS doesn't only capture emissions from power generation. It's vital for decarbonizing the wider economy. John Christopher talked about cement, steel, where process emissions are really hard to abate and where demand's going to continue to grow. CCUS also enables, as we talked about a little bit earlier, clean hydrogen to supply heating or electric storage, transport, and industrial processes. So I want to come back just finally to one more point that we made earlier. This is something we can do now. They're proven CCUS technologies. We've been talking about them. Both John Christopher and Scott have given great examples of work that we are doing now or technology that's under development. And we've got decades of experience in this area and also exciting technological advances being made. So we can apply and scale up proven technologies just to get started on decarbonizing now.
Yeah. So thank you, Cindy. Thank you, John Christopher and Scott. I think in summary, I would say, as all of you very amply demonstrated, this is a proven technology. It's being applied around the world in different situations, not just for enhanced oil recovery. We talked about ethanol, cement, steel, so many different areas which will require decarbonization, and new technologies for that. So CCUS is very well suited for it, and it is here and being deployed. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this CERAWeek conversation presented to you by IHS Markit. Thanks.